Hi guys, I'm Kimberly Daya and I am the name and the face behind my Sick Fit Life. Thank you so much for stopping by. I am filming a 3-part video series on where I've been, where I'm at now, and where I'm headed in 2018. This video will go over my full background from 2007 up until 2013, or at least the first 5 years of that background. The next 2 videos will cover the rest. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I really look forward to hearing from you. Please leave any comments or questions you have down below, and I will see you in the next one. I want to start by saying that my story, like a lot of others, started many years ago, about 10 years ago. July 28th was the day that I have in my head that I remember. I was 28 years old. I was working as a property manager, and for about a week prior to July 28th, 2007, I started getting leg weakness. And on July 28th, it became so severe that I wasn't able to get up from my desk chair. I remember needing to get up to go make a Xerox copy, and I literally could not stand up. I couldn't hold my weight. So I called my assistant in and told her, and long story short, she took me to the hospital. She actually wheeled me out to the car in my desk chair because that's how bad it got. They ran every test imaginable and they weren't really able to come up with much. So after a day or two, one night, so 2 full days, I was sent home, and after a couple days the symptoms started to subside, and I just wrote it off like a fluke thing, and I actually even forgot about it because I was living a pretty busy life. I had a 5-year-old son, I was married, and I worked full-time as a property manager, and I just literally forgot about it until about 2 weeks later. It came back in my arms, and I was at work and I was writing something down at my desk, and I couldn't hold my pen any longer. And my grip started to go away, and so I was like, going like this, like, what's going on? And each time I went to go pick up my pen, I couldn't hold on to it in order to write. So I went home that day, called my doctor, and it never really did get better after that. It quickly took on a pattern of kind of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So I would experience symptoms for about 2 weeks, and then they would sort of die down, and then they'd come back. They'd die down for 2 weeks, and then they'd come back for 2 weeks. And sort of that's kind of when I was keeping track, sort of what the pattern I was noticing was. And so when I was symptomatic, my assistant would have to literally drive me home from work, spend the night. She wanted to do this for me. Spend the night. She would actually take care of my family for me. She'd cook dinner, and she'd give my son a bath and do homework with them, and then she'd drive us to work the next day. And she would sit next to me at my desk, and I would dictate to her exactly what needed to be done, because I couldn't use, much of the time, I couldn't walk, I couldn't use my hands, so I couldn't type, I couldn't write, and so the only thing I had left, barely, was my brain. So that's sort of how I got by the next few months after that, until about January, when I was actually forced to resign from my job. Not forced, I chose to resign from my job. I just really had no other option. Meanwhile, in the interim between the time symptoms started in January, I'd gotten pregnant with my now 9-year-old daughter. And so I was pregnant, and I was going through all of this, and I had just resigned from my job, and so life as I knew it was basically over. So it was January 2008. I was the end of my 2nd trimester. My symptoms started they were alleviated. They lessened until they were almost completely gone, or basically completely gone. And I later found out that is actually very common with autoimmune illnesses, because your illness is suppressed during pregnancy. It's very common for the disease to go into to be dormant during that time. But then my daughter was born in June. My daughter was born July 5th, 1 month exactly to the day. I was standing at the coffee pot making some coffee, and I could feel my legs weakening from underneath me, and I was like unable to hold my body weight up. So I quickly made it to the couch, and I was like, oh dear God, it's back. And so I was just thinking, I'd forgotten about it. When I am not symptomatic, I try not to think about it. I mean, I really don't think about it. I have a life to lead, and so I had literally pretty much forgotten about it. I thought, okay, well, it's gone. And I had thought maybe I would go ahead and try to find a job and start working again, but it had come back with full force. So I went back to the doctor, and my doctor at the time. With my doctor at the time, I was sort of at a complete standstill. We were doing MRI after MRI, and with that doctor and that hospital, unless there was lesions in my brain, I could not be given a diagnosis of really anything neurological. Even though it was extremely obvious that there was something really wrong. And I was having some markers come up in some of the tests, but not the MRI, which is the main diagnostic test. And so I was desperately wanting to get diagnosed with something, because to me, diagnosis meant treatment, and treatment meant wellness, and that meant I could get on with my life. Without any kind of treatment, without any kind of medication, I was just left at a standstill. So I would plead with him and ask him, like, is there anything I can do? Is there a nutrition protocol? Is there supplements? Is there anything that I can do on my own at home that will help me to alleviate these symptoms? So I had a newborn, and he said, unfortunately not. And so I went home, and I remember kind of going down this rabbit hole that led me to my current doctor now. He was a neurologist. He still is a neurologist, but he was practicing neurology only at the time. And he's now a functional medicine doctor. And he was the one who brought me back to some sort of standard of living. So he based off of clinical data, the markers that he did find in some of my tests, he was able to diagnose me with multiple sclerosis, which then at that point I was able to get on injectables, and he started me on Cortef, which is hydrocortisone, and it's a steroid. So what that does, steroids, as we all know, they suppress the immune system. So that would allow me to then be in sort of this state of remission, because my immune system was suppressed, so the disease again was dormant. So I was on Cortef for, I think it was from 2009 to mid 2010, 2011 that I was on the Cortef. And so my symptoms at that point just became very intermittent, and they were pretty much controlled due to the steroid medication. Excuse me if I look down, because I do have notes to keep me on track with the years and the dates and such. But around this time, I started to feel like while I was manageable, I was regressing slowly, and it was sort of like every year the volume of the illness was turned up a little bit. And so by 2010, 2011, I could see and feel the regression of my health, and the symptoms were starting to slowly come back. Like I said, the volume was just being turned up little by little on these symptoms, and the steroid medication was not able to contain them as much. So I went through this very rebellious stage, because I was desperately trying to hold on to whatever quality of life I had left. I decided to, it was almost like I don't want to say do or die time, but it was like go big or go home. I only had a little bit of time left. I could feel it. It was like bubbling under the surface, like trying to keep a lid on a boiling pot of water on the stove. And so for about, it was like January 2011 to about June, July, I had a very active social life. I went out a lot, and I was in this sort of state of denial. Like I only had a little bit of time left. I could feel it. And so I was a party girl, and I just went out a lot, and I saw my friends a lot, and it was almost like saying goodbye to my old life, because I knew what was happening. I could feel it. I just felt like I was using up all I had left before my illness took me under, and I was acting out almost in a state of denial, although I was totally aware of what was going on. So about the fall and the winter of 2011, the bottom fell out, and for about 2 years it was literally, well, not literally, but it felt like hell on earth. My spans of reprieve were getting shorter and shorter, and so for example, I'd be really sick for a week, but then I'd have even a shorter time than that where I was well. So I was sick more often than I was well. I'd be sick, and then I would be well for a week, and I'd be well for 3 days, and then I'd get sick again, and another flare-up would start, and then that one might even be longer. It might be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And to give you an idea of what a flare-up is like, I will have extreme weakness in my extremities and in nerve pain. to the point where I'm unable to walk or use my arms or to make a fist, and I will just lose my grip entirely. I'll have complete loss of mobility, and when it's at its worst, I become paralyzed by the pain and the weakness. Other symptoms include massive tremors and convulsions, just this relentless shaking, almost like when you're really cold, but I'm not really cold. I just shake, nonstop, and it could be for 3 days. I just shake, and they call that tremors. And lassitude fatigue, which is really common with multiple sclerosis. Cognitive dysfunction, which is everything from brain fog and memory loss, loss of word retrieval, making it difficult to speak or communicate. I was notorious during this time for not talking to anyone. I couldn't. I lost my ability to really form sentences and to make any sense of what I was thinking, if I was thinking anything at all. I refused to talk on the phone. I still have this weird thing with the phone even now. And I just really wanted to be in solitude. And I spent about 2 years really seeing almost no one, unless they were like my immediate family. I saw my friends here and there, but not much. I was like a shell of who I was. And I didn't even know who I was at that point. It was losing, my identity was slipping under. And also to, sensory sensitivity, especially to noise and movement. I couldn't be in loud places without it really setting off all my neurological symptoms, or being in places where there's a lot of movement going on when my kids would play. It was really bad because the guilt just would get me, because they'd be playing, and just seeing them rolling around playing would like stir up anxiety in me, and stir up the shaking, and it would stir up the nerve pain, and it was just this, the volume would turn up on all of my symptoms. Obviously there was anxiety and depression in there. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. If you followed my journey, you might remember that sort of early, mid 2012, I was asked to be the MS Walk ambassador. And I was also on the cover of Sacramento Parent magazine with another group of moms. Both of those happened in the same month. I think it was April. And leading up to April, there was this significant decline in my health leading up to that time. It was the era of the wheelchair, I like to call it. We got this wheelchair right before that, and I was in and out of it that entire year and the first part of the following year. That I was, pretty much bedridden. But if I wanted to leave the house, I had to take the wheelchair, because my legs could only take me so far. I mean, they would come out from under me. So that was a really rough time. My ability to function on an acceptable level of wellness was so incredibly low, and none of my medications were working on a maintenance level. So if the pain got to be so bad that it became intolerable, I would have to take these heavy doses, which more times than not resulted in me being even more fatigued. And it was like, pick your poison, be either miserable and in pain or be drugged. And so I learned to have a really high pain tolerance, because I wanted to be awake and alert with my kids around and my husband, and be able to sort of be some sort of sideline participant of my life. So I learned to have a really high pain tolerance, and if I absolutely could not take it, then I would take heavy doses of the medication, which would more times than not knock me out. Financially, at that time, we were so broke. My husband couldn't work because between the kids and I, we needed him full time. Around the clock, he did absolutely everything. We got tons of offers at that time from people to help, which was, I can't even tell you what that meant to us. My brother would come and take the kids and take them to a movie and hang out with them. My mom did most of our housework. My dad would do our grocery shopping for us. I had friends bringing over meals for us. Our church would bring over meals for us. And I had just this army of people who were praying for us. And what that meant to us at that time, it's unexplainable what that meant to us at that time. It was a defining year. I spent a lot of time in solitude, and I was just extremely blessed that although I wasn't in communication with all these people regularly, there were people that were really stepping up in our lives to help us. By the end of 2012, I was introduced to the documentary Under Our Skin, which if you have Lyme disease or have read anything about Lyme disease, you might have seen it. By the person that introduced me to it, my stepsister, she also told me about, that she had Lyme disease and that she had just finished up at this clinic in Reno, Nevada, called Sierra Integrative Medical Center, and suggested that I go get a consultation because I was at a standstill with my treatment and I didn't know what else to do, and I was getting worse. And so we were, again, so broke, had no money. I mean, I don't even know how we were even feeding our kids at that time. I left out the part that we actually had to move out of our big, beautiful home. It was a really nice house, but we had to move out because I couldn't take the stairs, we couldn't afford it, so we moved into a much smaller home. But I digress. We borrowed $700 from my dad for this consultation in Reno. It was a $500 consultation to have me tested and see this doctor, the leading doctor out there, Dr. Fong. And so we borrowed $700 from my dad. $500 went to the consultation, and then $200 went to hotel, food and gas. And I remember it was snowing at the time. It was December of 2012. And we took all of our coins in and cashed them in to get chains to drive our car in the snow. It was just painfully broke. At Sierra Integrative, they do this dark field microscope exam. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they put your blood under a microscope. You can see it on the big screen, and it did confirm that I had the spirochete bacteria in my blood. My cells were infested with this bacteria, and it was like this awakening of, oh my gosh, it's not just MS, there's something else. And that's sort of when I learned that there's this correlation between the two diseases, which I'll get more into later. So we decided to make this last-ditch effort towards getting an aggressive treatment that this clinic offers. The treatment was to last 6 weeks, 6 days a week for 6 hours a day. And we estimated the total cost of the treatment at upwards of about $20,000, which obviously we did not have. So Mark began this fundraising campaign, which resulted in us raising about 1/3 of the cost. We raised about $7,000 in 3 months. And with that, I was able to start treatment. And we just literally went on $7,000 with the hopes that we would somehow come up with the rest of the money. And so that was the beginning of an entirely new chapter for me on my road to healing and wellness. So the purpose of this video was to bring you up to speed on the first 5 years from 2007 to 2012. In the next video and the ones that follow, I'll discuss the next 5 years, 2013 up until now. I hope you guys enjoyed this first video. I hope that I covered all bases. If there's anything that you want to know that I didn't cover, please leave your questions and comments down below, and I would be happy to respond. And I have a lot more planned for this channel. I hope you stay tuned. I really appreciate you coming by. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Mwah.